Back to one of our top stories now, and this is China laying the blame for the current problems between China and Australia at the foot of the former coalition government, saying it is the root cause. And it's also given 4 points with which how we can repair the relationship, supposedly. So joining us here in the studio is the chair of the Liberal Party Defence and National Security Policy Branch, Lincoln Parker. Lincoln, good to see you in person. So first of all, we'll break this up a little bit. So what do you make of that first claim that the whole root of the problem is because of the former coalition government?
Well, that's just normal Chinese propaganda influence operations. We know that the Chinese are not going to change their strategy no matter what government is in power unless that government really bends over and accepts all of these demands that China has put on the table. They put 14 demands on the table when Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister, and now they've got an additional 4 demands. And there's just no way that any Australian government is going to give up their sovereignty completely and become a vassal state to China, which is exactly what they want.
Yeah. So some of those points there. Australia must treat China as a partner, not a rival. Okay. 2 countries must seek common ground while shelving differences. So does that mean you've got to forget about the militarisation of the South China Sea? You've got to forget about the Uyghurs. You've got to forget about the economic coercion. We just turn away from that, do we?
Well, forget about jailed Australian journalists. Forget about jailed or any journalist. So I think Australia needs to go back with China with our own set of demands to say, first and foremost, you need to release Australian and indeed all political prisoners. Second of all, you need to drop illegal trade tariffs that you've unilaterally slapped on Australia, which is completely against WTO regulations and rules. Thirdly, get out of the Solomon Islands and stop interfering with the Pacific Island countries that absolutely don't want you there. And recognise Taiwan, pay COVID reparations. There's all sorts of things that we should be saying.
Well, I mean, that's not realistic, though. They're not going to recognise Taiwan.
Well, yeah. They're not, but it's a democracy.
You may as well try. So what other points did you want to argue that we should throw back at them?
Well, certainly the trade tariffs and certainly release political prisoners. And there's Australian political prisoners sitting in there, journalists right now, that's not getting proper representation and that should be released.
Just on the Solomon Islands, so we've just heard that news overnight that some Australian aid workers are not allowed into the Solomon Islands. They're being blocked, but Chinese security personnel are allowed in. How does that fit in with the bigger picture with what you've observed over the past 12 months or so?
Well, it really goes back to 2019 when Sogavare unilaterally decided to end a 36-year relationship with Taiwan and completely switch over to recognising China and then just put all his eggs in the Chinese basket for whatever reasons. He never went out and asked the people of the Solomon Islands whether they wanted to do that, and then to create all of this tension that's just driving in onto the Solomon Islands. And the other Pacific Islands just don't want their region to be a war zone, which is exactly what Sogavare is doing.
Why do you say that?
Well, because the people of the Solomon Islands and indeed the people of the Pacific Islands don't want to have all of this, I mean, China is not really the nicest kind of partner, as we know. And now Prime Minister Sogavare is saying he's going to delay national elections. And if we see, democracy postponed is democracy denied. And the people are democratic. They want to have a vote. And this is a really big issue. They don't want to have a Chinese military base on their territory, which incidentally completely threatens the complete east coast of Australia.
We saw unrest recently and we had to send Australian Federal Police over to try and sort it out. Do you see that happening again?
Well, our sources both on the ground and also experts that we are in touch with feel that there could be another civil war in Solomon Islands. So I'd really like to know what is Australia's plan to deal with unrest in the Solomon Islands. So Sogavare has his own personal police force trained by the Chinese and equipped by the Chinese to stop that.
Well, maybe he knows that's the case too, which is why he's bringing Chinese police in.
Well, that's what the plan has always been all along, because the people, as we've just talked about, don't like Sogavare's direction and they want to protest and he wants to crush them.
We've almost out of time, but what's the one thing that Anthony Albanese, in your view, needs to achieve this week at the Pacific Islands Forum?
He needs to get consensus across all of the Pacific Island countries, nations, to deal with the democracies of the world. Are you a democracy, or are you going to go and be under the boot of the Chinese communists?
And in your view, that's Sogavare heading towards, well, let's call it a dictatorship.
Yeah, he's a dictator. That's what he's becoming, unfortunately.
Okay. Wigan Parker, good to chat as always. We'll talk to you soon.